And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two good brothers, making his triumphant return to my temple, the man who is always up for a whipping good time, good brother Alm.
Hello there.
General Alm, good to see you.
Damn it, I forgot the rest of the line.
And, of course, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises would like to remind you once again, as we seem to have to remind you once a month at this point, you dumb fucking people, that Final Fantasy has no mechanical roots. Fuck you, fight me, we've discussed this ad nauseum, ad infinitum, whatever other ads you want to use, but no advertisements. That's my job.
And, well, I'm pretty sure in about a month we'll have to do it. We'll have to do it again once Sage comes along. What? Why are you groaning? We're gonna be involved in it.
Oh, I'm just thinking, whenever that happens, it's gonna be rough, because I forgot Sage was coming soon.
Yeah, and the project I've been working on that Zan and I've been working on for 3 years.
Yeah?
That's gonna have a booth at it.
I wish you luck.
I think we'll do pretty well.
We'll either do pretty well, or we will cause a international incident.
That's more what I'm thinking is going to happen.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Oh, I'm not threatening. I'm promising.
I mean, you know, how is an international incident not doing well?
I mean, look, I've gotten myself kicked out of a Starbucks before. This is amateur hour. But we are not here to go over that, though it probably will end up happening in the future. No, instead, we are here to talk about another missed opportunity, this being the second time we've talked about missed opportunities with Alm involved. But since I wanted to cause maximum chaos, and given the schedule timing the last time I did this with Alm, I figured I'd bring Zan along for the ride.
I still have not forgiven Nocturne.
Believe me, Nocturne's in the Book of Grudges, so understandable.
Sits here wondering exactly how little the word nocturne narrows it down.
Now, unless you're trying to throw shade at Chopin, which in that case, why? But
because I can.
But with that said, this is another Reconstruction night. And this time around covering Lords of Shadow 2, which I've talked about briefly, especially on the GeekWatch episode, A Franchise in Chaos, when we dedicated a whole episode just to talking about Castlevania. One of the 2 times we've done that. The other being trying to create a Castlevania Mugen 2. Making the Belmonts distinct for that was a lot harder than it would look.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But I had briefly talked about the Lords of Shadow reboot attempt, and how I had felt that some of the criticisms of that were a bit overstated, and I went into my rant about the fact that a lot of people were putting a critical lens on it in a way that it was never intended to be. Specifically, the linearity complaint with the original Lords of Shadow. I'd said that would have some merit if it weren't for the fact that they had no interest in trying to do the Metroidvania thing, weren't trying to do it. That wasn't even their big source of inspiration.
Yeah, not to mention with how it was a soft... well, no, it wasn't a soft. It was a hard reboot, let's be honest. it was more or less it being more linear made sense because the original games were linear. Get the story beats going, get us understanding the world.
Mercury Steam specifically cited Super Castlevania 4 as a major influence.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, it could have been worse. They could have done Dracula X as the SNES version of Dracula X as their inspiration.
That does not exist. Speedo Dracula does not exist.
Speedo Dracula doesn't exist. Speedo Dracula can't hurt you. Speedo Dracula.
Oh, God. I have to play through that one day on stream. Save me.
I'm sorry. What's this? He's complaining about being stuck in hell with the rest of us, Monk?
I've played through it once before. Not again, please.
Oh, you poor sweet summer child.
You
don't
fear death, you welcome it. Your punishment must be more severe.
I also played through Haunted Castle, the arcade version.
I mean, Monk, what is it that we always say? What is that we always say, Monk? God is punishing Alm for his hubris, and his work is never finished.
But it's worth noting that part of the reason the reboot was even done was because Konami had felt that the 6th generation Castlevanias did not sell up to par.
You mean Lament of Innocence and so on?
Specifically Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness. The handheld Castlevanias, that's a different story. But Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness a little bit, not quite as much. And I do, in a roundabout way, I do think part of the thing that impeded that is the fact that Devil May Cry existed for such a large amount of the 6th generation.
Yeah. And it's sort of a shame, too, because Lament of Innocence was genuinely good. Curse of Darkness, not as much, but it was still fine.
In the case of Lament of Innocence, that was definitely hurt by the existence, not only the existence of Devil May Cry, but the fact that its primary mechanic was very similar to Harmony of Dissonance's primary mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's a one-to-one, but they were similar enough. Also, that whole real-time menu thing was a mistake. Whoever thought of that, I hope they got flogged.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was a big-time mistake for Curse of Darkness with the real-time menus. I appreciate that in multiplayer games where you have to keep the action moving, but in single-player, let us pause.
Mm-hmm.
The only exception I make to that is Souls games, and that's because they were intended that way from the beginning.
Yeah. And in the case of Curse of Darkness, that got screwed over timing-wise by another similar on paper game out of Capcom, Chaos Legion.
I forgot that game existed.
It's a good game. It's just very underrated.
But that's why I forgot it existed.
But that idea of fighting alongside a AI controlled companion that you have a whole set of mechanics built around, I think you can see why I say similar on paper. And it coming out quite a bit beforehand. It's these sort of timing things can sometimes make or break a release.
Yeah.
Hell, D&D ended up learning that the hard way by putting out Honor Among Thieves like a week after John Wick Chapter 4.
Ooh, yeah, that.
And 2 weeks before Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, so that movie was destined to fail just by that alone.
To say nothing about the outside factors that were tarnishing the brand.
You mean Hasbro?
I'm specifically referring to it going down shortly after the OGL fiasco hit nuclear. Oh,
yeah, that. So Hasbro.
Yep.
Oh, and more specifically, WotC within Hasbro.
Although Hasbro took another L today because of the fact that the Netflix Power Rangers project is pretty much dead in the water.
Not surprising.
So, but getting back on the rails.
Yes.
Because go ahead.
Speaking of being back on the rails, as you're mentioning how Lords of Shadow, the original, the first one, it got bashed by a lot of people, which was unfairly done so because people were using that critical lens, as you said. Another thing that people were doing is a lot of people never actually played the game. Instead, most of them listened to a certain YouTuber who just bashed it and called it Lords of Plagiarism. If you know, you know. Despite the fact that, the game that he said it was plagiarizing stole all its mechanics from Lament of Innocence. So it's not plagiarism. It's more of developers learn from each other. Just have fun with the game.
It's
This is the
iteration.
reason why I have regarded terms like ripoff as what I call buzzword criticism.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I do have to say this. There are at times parts where the accusation of plagiarism can be valid, such as that video I posted just the other day of the mobile game that stole the entire Shadowbringers trailer for its own trailer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's plagiarism when you're stealing the entire trailer.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to, you've probably seen the video. It's been all over Twitter for like the last few days. But it shot for shot with some very minuscule changes. It is just the Shadowbringers trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But in this case, the combat in Lords of Shadow 1 and the combat in Lament of Innocence and the combat in the game he was saying it was plagiarized from, they're all action combat systems. And sure, they might be somewhat similar to each other, but considering that the protagonists in those games all use a whip-like weapon of some sort, long flowing types of attacks that you get from whips are going to look similar. It's
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much you can do.
Yep.
not to mention part of the reason why I have the disdain for the term is that it's used so cavalierly. Like even just having something that is in a similar direction automatically makes it a ripoff in some people's eyes.
I
Could be an
completely agree.
inspiration.
I completely agree because a lot of people forget. Even back in the day, that was what we used to call new games because it wasn't called ripoffs back then. It was called clones. How many Doom clones existed back then and exist now?
How many people have built their games from the bones of GZ Doom? The answer is yes. And most of those games are really fucking good. Like, sure, they're using a framework that has existed for 30 years, and you might want to call it, they're just ripping off the framework and reskinning it. Well, I mean, lazy people do that. Sure, there are people who just reskin GZ Doom and send out the game and say, "This is my new game." But there are way more people out there who take GZ Doom and do.
Have you guys seen what they've done with that thing with Sulaco? Just as a case in point.
Or even just using normal Doom. Have you seen myhouse.wad?
I have, and I've also seen Sigil. Although I really shouldn't count Sigil because made by John Romero. So does that really count as a clone?
It counts, Monk. He's technically not part of id anymore.
Fair.
Yeah. And also, to circle back around to Castlevania, there's also Simon's Destiny, which is a first-person recreation of Castlevania 1 in the GZ Doom engine.
Exactly.
Yep. And we've been festooned with Castlevania likes over the last few years, which some say that's oversaturation. I'm like, hook that shit up to my veins. But
we've been saying that about a lot of games recently, Monk. Inject that shit straight into my veins.
Yeah. Because the black pill is bad for your health.
Exactly.
Although
it's bad for your health because it's not supposed to be taken orally. It's a suppository.
that would explain so much about the Ivory Tower retirement home. But the big, as I said before, the big reason why I always felt that the the linearity and the God of Colossus arguments were somewhat weak is not just in that, but also in how the mechanics are designed. And if anything, what you have with Lords of Shadow's combat loop is a bunch of different elements. But that's nothing new with game design, and Zan and I were no exception to that. There was a I guess I'll say a meme on Twitter a couple weeks ago of people posting their indie games and then posting the games that inspired it, and we're no exception when it comes to Legend Edition. I did just that. I remember. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I also took the time to pick up any and every one of the of those and post them in the video games channel on the Monk's Monastery. Just be like, hey guys, here's a bunch of cool indie shit. Go look, go subscribe, go follow their Twitters, go add to your wish list.
There used to be a thing on DA called influence maps that a lot of people participated in. It's the same principle. Like, nobody creates in a vacuum. And the key thing is always going to be implementation. But I had argued that the Lords of Shadow concept got worse by trying to implement the more Metroidvania-like approaches, because not because Mercury Steam couldn't do that. They demonstrated that with the Metroid 2 remake, and somewhat with Metroid Dread, but that's a whole other story Zan and I have discussed in the past.
No, they did get the Metroidvania feel with Dread, except when you're fighting Chozo enemies. Go watch the monastic therapy episode about Metroid Dread and the fact that the Chozo enemies are basically action combat enemies, but you don't have the one thing every action combat game that's good has, some sort of immediate faultless defense, which, iframes or a multi-directional perfect parry is usually one of the two.
But it's more the fact that they tried to do the same direction that they were doing with the original Lords of Shadow, and then trying to do the Vania stuff with first Mirror of Fate. Although I'd argue trying to do the combo system with the whip that they tried to do wasn't the best idea. And I actually like Mirror of Fate for the most part. I just think it has some things that don't mesh and is also a little bit short.
Oh, I agree. I love Mirror of Fate as well, but no game is perfect.
Yeah, nobody's perfect except Kurt Hennig.
I can think of one game that's perfect, but nobody will agree with me besides Riona. And that's Super Robot Wars 30. So thank you.
Well, I just love throwing that in Gigix's face because I'm not letting that one comment from a few years ago go. Neither are you, Zan.
I will never let Gigix live down the fact that he decided that somehow Mecha was dead in the West.
Yeah, I don't know how he thought that.
Because
correction, I know he lives under a rock, right?
Well, because he lives in the mainstream and doesn't ever look at anything outside of it. I swear to fucking God. But Rails.
Yeah. But then of course we had Lords of Shadow 2, which the name itself purports to be a sequel to the original Lords of Shadow, but in reality it's a sequel to Mirror of Fate.
It should have been named Lords of Shadow 3.
And you have the notion of playing as Dracula, which to my knowledge is the first time that's happened proper.
Yes, technically yes.
And could have been a really fucking cool idea.
Along with this idea of following through that hidden ending from the original game, but being marred with the fact that one, they didn't have Kojima essentially protecting them from Konami because Kojima at that time was still mired in the development of Metal Gear Solid 5. And this was also around that time when Konami was trying to pivot more and more towards mobile games due to the success of Dragon Collection.
And also towards pachinko, because pachinko.
Mm-hmm.
And then the laws in Japan changed, and all of their pachinko dreams went down the fucking drain.
Yeah, and right around the same time, SNK decides to get out of the pachinko business. So, another case of life imitating art.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, marred with a rough introduction, the stealth segments that aren't exactly well liked, and the attempts to try and shoehorn in the castle with the idea of it being in his head. Kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I will be honest. I did like the castle segments, and I enjoyed the city segments, but that intro was so front-loaded.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that the idea that Dracula needs to be in stealth is laughable. Even a weakened Dracula who needs to drink blood now, this man who isn't just a vampire but is essentially a demon god.
Yeah.
You need to sneak around? No. Rush someone down, bite their neck and drain them, keep rushing them down. You're good. Go, Dracula, go.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I get where they're coming from on that, though. Because, and hear me out. Of course, we've always wondered, how Dracula comes back and gets back into full force, because it's not just a flash and suddenly everything's there. Well, except for maybe Rondo of Blood. But, but in most times, it's thinking of, okay, how'd Dracula get back to the strength? How'd he get everything going again? So I get where they're coming from there, but they should have made that much shorter than what it was at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, and if I'm going to be honest, something they should have taken inspiration from if they want to go, how did he suddenly come back to power? Blood Omen 2. Look what they did with Kane in Blood Omen 2. How did he suddenly come back to power? Go make it that short and get back into the action.
And it's funny you mentioned Blood Omen 2 because that one did have a stealth element. But in that case, it was because the Seraphan were so all-encompassing that bum rushing would be a bad idea.
At least early on. Once you got some of your powers back and also had drained literally everybody you ever came across, so your health bar was fucking massive, you could bum rush any of them and be usually pretty fucking fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, if they want to do you're weak at beginning and then suddenly he's back again, follow Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he goes around acting like a suave gentleman and just getting people on his side.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Oldman, we love you.
But the point is that after a lot of tumult, that pretty much nuked not only Konami doing tentpole tier games, but also nuked most of the idea of doing Castlevania video games by them, and all the departures and all the fallout after that, which does make it a very fascinating what if story. But with that said, let us have a go. So, we talked about this before we went live, and I think one of the first things that needs to be addressed is the Mirror of Fate question. And I think what we ultimately decided is that this hypothetical would integrate some of the aspects from Mirror of Fate, but not the entirety of that game.
Yeah, after discussing it with Alm, we determined that the two specific facets of Mirror of Fate that affect literally everything in Lords of Shadow 2 are the existence and creation of the existence of Trevor and his eventual transition into Alucard, and the existence of the Toymaker and his roots as well. Beyond that, Mirror of Fate is not impactful enough to keep everything else.
Yeah, it's mostly there to explain that the Belmont bloodline still exists. Gabriel was not the end of his line. And now we know where Alucard came from, as well as this other toy maker that we're thinking, okay, what all things is he making? Because he created a lot of crafty things that are in the castle. What's his deal?
And this presents now, even with all that, an overall arc that I think does need to be maintained is is the relationship with Zobek, and part of it being the attempt to stop Satan's children from bringing him back to life. Like that is our finale. Our finale isn't. It would be, and the reason I say it would have to be that is because that was already lampshaded in that extra ending in the original Lords of Shadow.
Yeah.
So it's something we can't really deviate from. Now I will admit that early in medias res, the whole thing with the siege, I would be perfectly fine with keeping that completely untouched. Though I will note one thing when it comes. I will admit this. I've always liked the light and shadow magic system that was in Lords of Shadow. And on its own, it's pretty nice. I've seen some people make Ikaruga comparisons. I think that only really is the case in a few missions.
Yeah.
It's a surface level comparison.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a nice risk versus reward factor, because you can risk it and just go for raw damage output with the red magic, or if you want to use the light magic and heal yourself,
I would. The only thing is that I was a little bit disappointed that the shadow magic as Gabriel is just claws. When light magic is giving you a sword. Like, at least give him an axe or something. I mean, you're already going to be using the whip as your default neutral weapon.
True, it would have given a chance for a light, medium, and heavy type of strikes that could be put together through the whip, sword, and axe.
And I'm just using the axe as an example. If you don't want something that leans close to Dante, I'm pretty sure there's another weapon that would work just as easily.
For a heavy weapon.
For a weapon to represent the shadow magic.
I mean, one thing that could have been done is make it a elongated spear or a trident, because, just some reference from Vlad the Impaler, put people on sticks.
That's appealing to Monk a bit much there. He likes his long sticks with pointy bits.
Yes.
Well, the big thing is that there seems to be like a bit of a triangle there for weapon variety based on what magic you're using. And the axe or whatever seems to be a heavy weapon.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna continue to appeal to the monk with long sticks with pointy bits, we can just make this a heavy glaive.
True.
I would be perfectly fine with that.
Because glaives are not used in enough games, and I am tired of them getting fucking ignored.
And I will now, aside from that change, the whole siege I'm perfectly fine with keeping. Especially since I really loved that scene of I guess I'll call him a zealot, praying with that cross, and Dracula finishing that same prayer just to nuke the whole thing.
Right, that was a good one right there.
But what I think would be telling with that is throughout Lords of Shadow, there was this implication that he was some chosen one, that he was chosen by God.
Mm-hmm.
I would use that as a lampshade to say even with him becoming a vampire, that status as being chosen by God hasn't changed.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I mean, it makes sense, seeing as how his transformation into a vampire was to fell a greater demon that was going to come out, the Forgotten One.
Mm-hmm. And when it when it comes to the aftermath, obviously in the original game, you had that heavily front-loaded thing of Dracula coming out of his his coffin thanks to Zobek. You had the stealth segments, which I will note this. I find that there's a certain pattern that happens when it comes to bad stealth segments in games. Aside from the fact that they're put in games that aren't built for stealth, that's one issue. But the other is that the fail state is too punishing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need another example, look at the first time you go into the fortress in Wind Waker.
And it throws you all the way back out to the beginning. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no matter where you fail.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
one slip up and you got to reset.
Well, I have to bring up another Mercury Steam game because it's another fault with Metroid Dread that the ME sections are basically stealth sections until you go find their CPU and get the hyper beam that you're going to use against them in that section to get the power from them. It's a stealth section that doesn't fit the feel of the rest of the game, and also as you go on further becomes more punishing because the power that you're going to get from that ME would make the stealth section easier. And all the powers that you've gotten before don't really help you in the stealth section. There's a very specific pattern you have to follow. It's not stealth at that point. It's a puzzle, and the punishment of the puzzle is death and reset.
Yeah.
Counter argument: Metroid has always been a bit of a puzzle game in a sense, so that does make sense for that one.
I can agree if the puzzle had multiple solutions. It doesn't until you get the power from the Emmy.
And this is as good a spot as any to go full circle with it. You look at a lot of games that are doing stealth elements properly, there's usually layers of fail states. In addition to the fact that in order for you to actually have to be forced to reset, you have to make a lot of mistakes.
Well, and on top of that, again, stealth games that have good stealth also have layers of solution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we're going to look at Konami games, since we're talking Castlevania, we would inevitably then have to make the comparison to Metal Gear Solid. You can do things without getting caught at all, and in fact, there are difficulty levels you can unlock in certain versions of the games that, if you get spotted, it is a fail. But that's the hardest difficulty, and it's a reward for getting through the game on other difficulties just because you want to challenge yourself. But you can get through, for example, Metal Gear Solid 2 without ever being seen if you are good enough.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other solutions you have, like sneaking up and knocking people out, or killing them, or even just getting straight up into a firefight. None of those are true fail states in the stealth, and you can even eschew stealth if you really want to. A good stealth game has multiple layers to the point where some solutions are just not stealth at all.
Yeah, and I agree. That is the way that a good stealth game would go. However, a lot of games that are not made to be stealth games, like Lords of Shadow here, the stealth stuff, after that front load first segment, it rarely ever happens. So I think what should have been done is the fact that it should have been a thing of, okay, you get into a fight, you can get through it if you get caught, but it's going to be tough. They could have at least done that.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do think the reason why a lot of developers fall on that, oh, you got spotted, instant fail thing, is due to the fact that a lot of developers who are not used to making stealth games, they get tired of the stealth as optional trope. So they make it to where it's not optional, you need to learn this mechanic.
And that, railroading to that extent in a game where stealth isn't even really expected. Because I'm pretty sure that most people probably went into Lords of Shadow 2 thinking there wouldn't be any stealth because, well, Lords of Shadow 1 and Mirror of Fate.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is a at that point you do need the layers of you need the layers of failure, and there are other ways to make it so that stealth, while optional, is still optimal. And it could be rewarding for someone who has system mastery of a game where stealth is optimal but still optional.
Mm-hmm.
To go the harder route of not doing stealth. Maybe they get extra goodies for clearing an encounter that normally you'd sneak around because otherwise you'd just die from how overwhelmed you get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, thank you, Akira Coops, for the raid.
Welcome, Raiders.
Yep. But I would like to, as far as those kind of segments, the approach I think should be done is to take some, and hear me out on this, take a bit of a page from Metro 2033. What I mean by that is that stealth is a way to make the inevitable combat encounter easier for you. If you want to bum rush, you can still do that, but you are going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I could agree with that. That sounds honestly like a good idea for a lot of games that they're not built around stealth. Just have it to where it's a boon if you pull it off.
Now, granted, Metro didn't exactly accomplish that idea 100% right, but I will give them a little bit. I will give them a little bit of slack because of the extenuating circumstances when it came to the development of Metro. Which, calling it an absolute shit show would be an understatement in some cases. But
well, and then we have an example from the Bethesda floor where stealth ranged fighter is kind of the optimal build for most of their recent games. Even though I say recent, Skyrim's from 2011. That's not recent. And don't even say, oh, but all the re-releases and remasters. No, it's still a 2011 game, still using the Gamebryo 3 engine. Fuck you, you're wrong.
The GameCube is over 20 years old.
We love the GameCube. That's, I think, where a developer said, hey, stealth can make your gameplay, it can be a reward for doing things in a different way, and went too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sweet spot, and it's hard to hit.
And I do think that I think one of the other things is integrating is how to integrate the castle. In Lords of Shadow 2, you had it that the castle was quote unquote in his head, especially since it was dealing with a lot of his literal inner demons when it came to the castle or some kind of memory. It was never really clear.
They sort of explained it, but not really. What it was is that it was partially in his head. What he had was his memories of the castle, but it was in sort of an alternate realm, like the Chaos Realm.
Mm-hmm.
So he was actually teleporting to another realm. He wasn't actually in his head. He was just in this other realm. But it wasn't made really clear. It could have been much clearer.
And of course, Carmilla wanted to trap him there forever.
Yeah.
I think a approach to that would be a much more fitting setup is the idea of having Satan's followers using his memories of the castle along with channeling that same chaos realm to essentially merge and have the castle encroach on the world. In other words, you're splitting it between the modern areas where the castle is encroaching and the facsimile of Castlevania which is represented in these chaos realms that are bleeding into reality.
Hmm. Yeah, the way I always thought they were going to do it, and I was surprised they didn't, was because the city was built around the castle. It was built around Castlevania. I always thought what they were going to do was make it to where parts of the castle were still there. It's just now has some more modern technology and built in with it, but it's still got that castle feel. The entire place is just the castle. With, the courtyard now having the roads and stuff to go in and out of the city, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I'm going with this encroachment because I feel it's a good way to have the Gothic architecture while also having semi-modern. And I'd actually lean into some of that neo-Gothic motif that was all over the place in the 90s and 2000s, and having it kind of bleed into the more classical Gothic instead of using like factory and sewer levels, because one, those have been done to death everywhere, and two, it's not going to have the same visual identity, and even if you do have it, it's going to clash with pretty much all the character designs you're going to see.
Yeah, not to mention, no one likes a sewer level.
No.
You're about 10 seconds away from being kicked out of the call.
You can try and kick me out of the call. You're not the controller of the call. I can think of one sewer level that's good. I can think of one. Just give me some time. I will find out.
All right, folks, the stream is going to be going for about 10 years. I hope you're comfortable.
No, it's in the back of my head. We'll continue conversation, and when it comes to me, I'll be like, "Oh, this sewer level."
But although
Final Fantasy VII, there we go. Final Fantasy VII Remake specifically. That sewer level's pretty good.
we will grant that, but I will counter with saying exception proves the rule.
Oh, I'm not saying that the rule isn't that sewer levels suck. I'm just saying there are good sewer levels.
I will, however, take a sewer level over any level with ice physics.
Second.
Oh man, that's ironic coming from you, Monk.
I know.
Not just funny coming from you, literally ironic because of your avatar and its ice powers.
Yes. I am well aware of this.
I will then counter with the fact that I'm on the side of H.C. Bailey here. We both love good ice physics.
Oh. If I really have to go into why I hate ice physics so much, blame some bad experiences with Chip's challenge when I was a little kid. That's where the nightmares started.
Of course, Chip's challenge. We can't agree on everything, guys, but it's okay. This is a free country, and you're both free to be wrong.
Well, thank you. It's great to know that you're allowed to be wrong.
But something else I had actually considered in order to put in a bit of variety, especially since their paths end up intersecting anyways. You remember how the canon Lords of Shadow 2 had a whole DLC expansion that was a glorified prequel with Alucard setting up the items in the castle?
Yes, that should have been part of the main game.
In this hypothetical, that's part of the main game. There are certain chapters where you are playing as Alucard, wielding the Kasegrim.
Yeah, I agree with this, and I feel really bad for Mercury Steam on that, because originally it was going to be part of the main game. It just got pushed into being DLC because they were rushed to get the game out there. Which you can, if you've played the game, you can tell it was rushed by that ending. Oh my lordy.
Oh yeah. Although
what ending? Lords of Shadow 2 never ended. It just kind of trailed off.
Yeah. Although I know it'd be tempting to bring in that one boss who was treated as the last Belmont, Victor. I would instead have Victor as a recurring almost nemesis like affair.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I would not say that Victor is the last of the Belmonts. I don't think that should be a thing.
No. That wouldn't, as far as I'm concerned, that wouldn't be a thing, but what would be a thing is him showing up every now and again to pick a fight with you.
Yeah, and it could be done in a way that whenever we fight him in Lord Shadow 2, normally he has all of his abilities and items already. Make it to where each time he shows up new, he has one of his new items or trinkets.
What, like the SAX?
Yeah.
I mean, it worked. It worked for Metroid. Why not for Lords of Shadow too? I would also like to point out that when it comes to the family tree from the Lords of Shadowverse, somehow, even in Lords of Shadow 2, Simon is hinted as being alive, kind of. I say hinted. It's shadowed in a way that you can't really make for sure.
I don't think Simon is alive in 2 because that's how many hundreds of years later?
The Belmont clan achieves immortality in various ways in Castlevania in general. I don't think we can count him as down and out, especially since Trevor did become Alucard after all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he became Alucard because Gabriel transformed him into Alucard by giving him his own blood.
Yes. But that also does not mean that Simon couldn't have found something else that would have just as easily given him immortality. Let's be honest here. The Belmonts are kind of cursed in that respect. Even in the Lords of Shadowverse, they're cursed in that respect. Not to mention, an unknown amount of descendants between Simon and Victor means that there are likely plenty of Belmont.
Yeah, I don't think Simon and
families.
Victor could have kids. You know, they sort of don't. One of them doesn't possess the equipment the other would need in order to have kids.
Now, that being
I said descendants between Simon and Victor, as in the people that descended from Simon to eventually reach Victor. Thank you for trying to muddle all of that home.
You're welcome.
Now, that being said, when it comes to bosses, I do think that keeping the acolytes, you know, Risa, Nurgle, and Guido is perfectly fine.
Well, because they're servants of Satan, so that makes sense. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't see a reason for the Gorgons to exist. Like, you could have probably replaced the Gorgons with anything else closer to chaos, and it would have worked out just fine.
The other thing is I do think the former Brotherhood should also have some degree of an appearance.
Yes,
Since Zobek is still around.
However, I wouldn't have it that these are these are the original Brotherhood, but rather reflections possessed by demons.
Could see that.
Since
Yeah.
again, the framing device that you have is this is not the original Castlevania. What this is a reconstruction of it used by a mix of the acolytes is powers and the chaos and Gabriel's memories. This one, it is this giant cocktail of different elements, and because of that, you can have the castles of being of chaos concept, where it doesn't have to look anything like the castle from the any of the castles in the original Lords of Shadow, and instead have this mix of elements to basically let it have the individual rooms look like anything. And that would actually be part of the goal of having some that look like they're half in between classic and modern.
Yeah, that would work well. And I was also thinking, since we're talking about, obviously we're doing a reconstruction. One thing that's been on my mind is, as you mentioned, them trying to go full Metroidvania with it. It sort of bit them in the butt. I personally enjoyed it. I enjoyed exploring around. I think the best way they should have gone with it is they still had maybe stages and chapters that you could follow through. But after you're done with those stages and chapters, you can then go back through the missions if you want to explore around.
Here's my counteroffer: tiers and tent poles.
You're going to have to
I-
elaborate.
That's a terminology that he picked up originally from the Gargoyles animated series, where you have specific episodes, the tent poles, which hold up the primary overarching, say, plot of that specific arc, and then the tiers are essentially episodes you could basically play in any order between the tent poles that may contribute in some part to the arc in smaller ways, but also have their own internal stories.
Oh, so Simon's Quest.
I mean, I don't know if this is the way he imagines it, but the monk and I tend to share a brain from time to time. The tiers are the story chapter / mission things, or the temples or the story chapter / missions, and then within a story chapter or mission, you have the tiers that are an explorable Metroidvania-like map.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was the idea you were going with, Monk, but that's what I was also imagining.
The idea I was going with is essentially a series of individual Castlevania-like areas. Like take say the alchemy lab from Symphony of the Night and make that its own stage. You have a bunch of stages that are explorable, but you don't have a overall unification. These different stages taking place in both the modern and in the with a modern and a castle area. Something not far removed from, say, the A and B castle that you saw with Harmony of Dissonance. It's just that you have an A side and a B side, but not in the sense of moving between the two, more the first and second act of those stages.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's sort of what I was getting at as well, where whenever you're playing through it, the first time it's straightforward because it plays, it has a full story beat that you're following, you're doing what you need to, sort of like how Lords of Shadow 1 was. But then after you finish an area, then that area becomes explorable, within the other ones, or you can continue on to the next story beat.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that.
After you've beaten a few, then the next story beat chapter comes along, and the process repeats for the next act, doing this kind of thing in 3 acts. And I know some might say that this sounds a bit like what's done with Mega Man. That's not exactly the case, because I'm not doing the rock paper scissors setup for bosses.
Well, I mean that there's only specific Mega Mans that kind of do that in the first place, anyway, Monk.
Yeah, only ones I can think of were 01 and ZX.
Yep. Now, once again, talking about the I think we need to really establish the Rogues Gallery from the beginning here, just because building the missions and story beats around them is kind of necessary.
I would say so. So I think what I'd like to do with that is go through the list, and you can tell me if this is one that we'd keep or we'd drop, and and the theming of the stage.
You already know that I think that the Gorgon sisters are unnecessary, and that we probably could come up with a better holder of chaos, whatever that holder may be.
Is it just the sisters that you had an issue with, or the Gorgon Titan as a whole?
I found it pretty contrived. Like, it just didn't really fit compared to other members of this particular Rogues Gallery that we have. And the Gorgon Titan is kind of doofy.
How about instead of the Gorgon sisters, Legion?
That would work.
Legion has been a series staple that at least represents some part of chaos when you go into certain places. I think that would be a lot better, especially since Legion coming together to become a giant monstrosity. Well, it makes sense.
Ooh, and to circle back on this, that could also be a stage where the stealth being optional could come in handy because, say, maybe you've slain a bunch of enemies that stage. That makes the fight with Legion harder because it's absorbing all those corpses that you've made along the way, in that stage particularly.
I could see that being a useful thing where instead of killing everything, you avoid as much combat as possible, so Legion is not as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we'd clue the player in on that, though. That's you always want to make sure that you don't just like say, "Oh, hey, don't kill everything," and Legion will be less powerful. But there still needs to be at least some clue that.
That's easy. Have it to where they see Legion at first, and the player sees in a cutscene or something, Legion absorb a corpse or something like that, and gives an easy explanation as, "Oh, it can do that. Let's not cause that to happen."
I would say one way to do that is having a mix of humanoid and non-humanoid monsters. The non-humanoid ones are safer to go at and might even start infighting to aid the process.
Yeah, you could actually. That would be a really if you if that's going to be a cutscene. You don't want to do the whole camera zooms in on Legion absorbing a body because that's a little too head of the nail type thing.
True, but you also got to remember we're talking about something that is a sort of nail on the head series.
I know, but I like to at least accept that most of the players of these games aren't going to be literal children and are at least somewhat adept at picking up context clues. I like to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Now, listen, most of them won't be literal children. You're right, but they are mentally children.
Okay, so I say we split the difference here. What happens is, as Monk pointed out, you have a mix of humanoid enemies or human enemies and non-human monstrous enemies, and as Legion is passing by, they influence the non-human enemies to kill the human enemies so that Legion grows. And we see that the corpses being not just absorbed by Legion, but even the non-human monsters which have been influenced, throwing corpses at Legion.
As far as the environment, I'd actually say some sort of abandoned military base that becomes essentially a castle under siege.
I can see that you have an abandoned military base that when we transfer to the castle side becomes like the battlements while it's under siege. I can see that. That'd be kind of cool as a backdrop.
Because if Legion's looking for corpses, there's gonna be no better spot than a war zone.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing, as you were mentioning earlier about having the castle encroach upon the modern city, it could be that the part of the castle that's encroaching is, say, maybe the I had it. Catacombs is getting pushed up or brought in that area where it all is, and people could be using, say, maybe more. Trying to think of what the name of the things are down there. Besides coffins, not coffins. I mean, like
Mausoleums.
Yes, using the parts of the mausoleum for cover to fight with each other, fight against each other, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that could make sense if the catacombs are being pushed above ground as part of the siege. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, side note, something I think I came upon now that we're substituting the Gorgons with Legion because, well, Legion makes more sense. Since are we keeping Satan as the ultimate bad guy for this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then I think we have a structure that I absolutely love because using it is fun. Of the 7 deadly sins of Catholicism to inspire our biggest bosses. Legion, while Legion's in a war zone, Legion himself is not a representative of war. I would argue that Legion is a representative of gluttony.
Which, if we're going by that, then would you have... Because I do think Carmilla being...
Carmilla's lust.
Yeah.
Mm.
Carmilla straight up is lust. She wants to keep Dracula for herself and also become more powerful than him, but also because she... Bitch be kinky, but not in the good way.
Yandere.
I've dated one. Trust me, you don't want that.
No.
You too, Alm, eh? First time?
Only time.
I accidentally dated... I will admit it now, everybody. I didn't listen the first time when somebody told me not to stick my dick in crazy. I did it more than once, and that's my bad.
Mm-hmm. I would say keeping the stealth element that you had with the fight against Carmilla, I'd be perfectly fine with. I think the tricky thing is how to do staging, since the first time around you have that whole thing of her looking for you with that lamp until things get out of hand. I think the way that I see it is I'd see the modern part being some kind of park, some kind of in all but name equivalent to Central Park in New York, and shifting into shifting into a ballroom, honestly. Like I feel that would be. I mean, it'd be tempting to have the modern part be a dance hall, but no, that would look ridiculous.
Yeah, last thing we need is vampires dancing on stripper poles. Wait.
Now you're just appealing to Monk and the Blade movies.
And probably 99.9% of the internet.
I mean, the Blade movies literally had underground raves where vampires would dance on stripper poles, so that's why I said you're appealing to Monk.
Mm-hmm.
Some motherfuckers always got to ice skate uphill.
He can only say that because he's black.
Fuck off.
But with so you want the modern area to be a park?
I was thinking either Central Park or actually I take that back. Instead of Central Park, what about a art gallery?
Because an art gallery turning into a ballroom seems a little too... I think that's a trope that's actually gone into cliche at this point.
Fair.
Like, the ballroom makes sense because, well, Carmilla is a seductress and wants to metaphorically and in some cases physically sweep Dracula off his feet. But just like we had a military base into battlements with catacombs pushing out of the ground, while those things are related by war being the common theme, the arts are a lot more ephemeral than that. You can connect them in various ways rather than a dance hall or a museum or some sort of art gallery or studio. Let's keep the outdoor idea, but make it an outdoor amphitheater.
That I'm far more willing to go with, on the condition that the park thing, we shift that over to Agrius.
Yeah, Agrius also is going to be Wrath, just so you know.
Yeah, it has to be Wrath.
Kind of has to be Wrath. But I think the big one with the outdoor amphitheater, while it doesn't necessarily have to be in a park, since we're going to give that over to Agrius due to the nature of his nature, I think we can still have some element of romanticism with the outdoor amphitheater. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a park, but at least it'll have some of the what's a good way to put this? There's certain outdoor amphitheaters that I've seen in pictures of, at least in Europe, where they integrated what little natural elements were around them in a way that made it look like the amphitheater grew out of it. And I think we should keep that type of theming there. Mm-hmm. Just because when we switch to the ballroom, you know that you're no longer outside, you know that you're inside and you're in for it, because that's Carmilla closing the doors behind you.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, like the amphitheater may have some spectators that Carmilla is controlling, since she does control people pretty well, being a vampirist herself.
So what you're saying here is you still haven't learned your lesson. You might go for number 3.
I am the incarnation of chaos at this point. If anything, I'm sticking the dick of crazy into others.
That's a yes.
but I can see that. Now, when it comes to Agrius, I do think it should be that Central Park-like place that I mentioned before, that just becomes far more decayed as you switch over, kind of akin to a castle garden that is well past its prime.
Yeah. I don't think, however, that the stealth section for Agrius's fight should be kept. Fuck that.
No.
This is a fight of wrath. Part of the reason that you suddenly go into a decayed castle garden is because Agrius's wrath is affecting everything. He's charging around. He's trying to get you dead. He lured you to where he thinks the kill box is, and now he's just gonna go for it. So as the park starts getting beat up and the castle nature takes over, not only are you going to be in this disrepaired castle garden, the statues are gonna get knocked down and crumbled by Agrius, and eventually things are he may even, just because of striking metal against stone creates sparks, everybody, and with withered and dry topiaries, I didn't say that right, did I?
You want to fight with the forest on fire.
I eventually want to fight with the forest on fucking fire. Yes.
Speaking of fire, give me one. I'll be right back. I smell smoke. I'll be right back.
Oh, yeah. Go check that.
Yeah.
We can delay for now. Go check that, Olm.
Yeah. So.
But yes, I want the fight with the forest on fucking fire eventually. I want it to progress that way, though.
I would say this particular spot could be considered a protracted fight, because up until that point he is essentially hunting you.
Yeah, and when you start in Central Park, he's hunting you. Trees are gonna fall behind you as he chops them down to try and get you, herd you where he wants to go, or there's gonna be like traps that go off around you. Obviously, since we're not doing an actual stealth section, I think the traps should be fairly obvious enough that unless you're really dumb and not paying attention, you won't blunder into them and you can set them off.
They'd be properly signposted, but all of the traps should be natural. Like instead of some sort of surprise pit trap, it's a spot where the soil is much softer than normal.
Yeah.
Or
I think the only traps that should be fully unnatural are Agrius being so pissed that it isn't working, he cuts down a tree as an attempt to either hurry you up or herd you into a different direction. Because I think Agrius could cleave through a tree in one blow, don't you?
Yeah. But there was always the vibe of him being this incarnation of death as opposed to his brother. but also this incarnation of the hunt.
Yeah. And again, that's why he's Wrath. You killed his brother, and now. Hello, my name is Agrius. You killed my brother. Prepare to die.
And I would say the owl familiar is would be a good way to lampshade it.
I could see it. I think something else that with Agrius is, as the fight goes on, after he's done hunting you and you're in the fight proper because you've reached the center of the park and now things are slowly going over to the castle.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting less and less patient as a hunter, and it's becoming more and more the when we talk about hunter, this is a primal hunter, someone who stalks and then charges and throws themselves into the hunt.
Yes.
And so the fight in the actual castle gardens, some of the stuff is going to be you fighting, and maybe part of the phase change is you knocking him through some of the larger topiaries, or maybe he knocks you through some of the larger topiaries, depending on who gets hit most in that particular phase. You can have some variations on how the battle goes. And finally, when you've gone around, knocked down statues, cut through a bunch of hedges and hedgerows and all the different. Make sure I'm using that right word. I was right. Topiaries are creating art out of plants. Like the plants that are sculpted to look like spheres or swirls or animals. So I was using the right word. Never mind. Sometimes I gotta just keep track of myself here. But you've smashed statues, you've gone through the hedges, topiaries are ruined. This already decayed castle garden is now just a wreck because the Agrius's anger has just it's broken through the hunter's patience and now just gone to primal fury. And that's when also the fire starts, because he's been chopping through statues trying to get to this point. Metal on stone creates sparks, and you're in a dry, rotting castle garden. So that final battle should be, everything's on fire around you, and it's a knockdown, drag out slugfest. Mm-hmm. I don't think there needs to be any amount of subtlety here. This is Dracula, primal vampire lord, versus Agrius, primal old god of death and hunting.
Yes.
Also, welcome back home.
Thank you.
I managed to filibuster long enough that we didn't even move on to the next boss.
Which, the next one would be the Toy Maker, and what exactly would you... which of the 7 sins would you give him?
Let me take a good look at his backstory here.
I mean, honestly, I think maybe greed.
Let me see here. I'll see if I agree with you or not.
Because the whole point with this backstory is that he kept on going and didn't take care of his heart. He got too greedy with things. So that's just my guess on it.
Yeah, what I see out of him, based on these, especially based on the story and the fact that he's doing the classic motif of the puppeteer, I would imagine that the Toy Maker is someone who was trying to create the most lifelike puppet possible. Only to, it's the classic story of someone trying to make a lifelike puppet but ended up becoming as such.
Mm-hmm.
And I would I would say in this case the deal with the devil that he ended up making at the end of his life, that demon ends up possessing his body. The original, i.e., the original toy maker, died centuries ago. What this
Yeah.
is ironically a demon puppeteering his body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see.
And
I would actually, looking at what happened to him with the Bernard family,
mhm.
how what they did is they trapped him and tried to get him possessed because he had such a kind and innocent soul, in order to twist his puppeteering into making weapons of death and destruction. I'd almost say that in this case, the demon summon would have to be a demon of envy. They envied his skills, so they'd have to take him over to have his skills, rather than greed, because the toy maker himself, in the original story, throws off possession multiple times.
True.
So the toy maker himself, the actual human, I don't think would have a representation on the seven deadly sins, and instead would, if we were even using them, though we wouldn't be, would be an embodiment of one of the seven heavenly virtues, or also known as the cardinal virtues.
Charity.
He would be charity, or he could be kindness, technically, as kindness in the the seven deadly sins and seven heavenly virtues, as revised by Pope Gregory I. The opposite of envy was kindness. The opposite of wrath was patience. The opposite of pride was humility. Then the opposite of avarice or greed was charity. I think in this case it would be kindness, because everything looking at his backstory is that he is a kind soul that preferred to build toys for children and wanted to make people happy. So I think he'd absolutely be a representative of kindness. The demon trying to possess him, that he doesn't succumb to but dies instead. So he'll be in heaven at this point. But the demon that takes him is definitely a demon of envy. They envied his skills, and I would also argue that this makes it so that his creations aren't perfect. The toy maker's creations are imperfect in this case, because the envious demon could not actually possess the soul of the toy maker, and in so doing only got a corrupted and lesser version of his skills. And he'll forever be pining for the perfection that the toy maker had, and that he could never steal, he could never take. I think that would be a good theme for that demon too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just kept rambling
as far as the staging area, I think that given the whole state of a toy maker and being able to make custom toys, as tempting as it would be to use a factory, I don't think that would fit. I honestly think a museum would be a much better fit for the modern side of it.
A museum that goes into a large nursery.
Something to that extent.
I was thinking maybe museum into a carnival.
That could work too.
There was a very carnival motif with his stage. So it's not too much of a reach. And
I still think there should be some representative of a nursery somewhere, due to the original source of the toy maker being someone who created toys for children.
Oh,
something twisted, perverted.
You just gave me an idea.
Go for it, on.
Have the original modern day place be within a nursery, that's now fallen is slowly twisting into this warped carnival.
That I'd be willing to go. I'd be willing to go with the nursery, but let me raise you one further: a abandoned theme park.
Yeah, close enough.
Something akin to that Dismal Land project that Banksy did.
Mm-hmm.
Or something akin to the amusement park from Nier Automata.
Oh, that too. I just wanted to invoke Banksy because it's rare that I find anyone who can out troll me.
I understand. My big thing with when once you start getting amusement parks inspired into any game, I'm always going to default to Nier Automata because that is, let's be honest, what Square and Yoko Taro did with that amusement park has become iconic.
I still have yet to play Automata. I've only played Replicant. I need to finish. I need to play Automata.
No. Oh no! Play it.
I have it. I need to play it.
Play it. It's so good. I'm not gonna say anything else. It's so good.
Yeah.
I know it's 2017 and technically embargo's over, but I don't like spoiling good shit for my friends.
Fair enough.
But when it comes to the acolytes, the only one that I feel should just be nicked is Guido, since he didn't really do a whole lot anyways, aside from speak Enochian and die after getting the worst kind of facepalm.
Who's Guido again? I thought Han shot first.
So Monk, we should still have 3 acolytes though.
Third one is Zobek.
Okay. Because we do need 3 more sins.
Yes.
Because we've got gluttony in the form of Legion, we've got lust in the form of Carmilla, we've got wrath in the form of Agrius, and now envy in the form of the Toymaker. Well, that leads us with sloth, pride, and greed. Who gets what?
I think given his particular scheming, I think Zobek should get pride.
Yeah, definitely.
I can agree. Absolutely.
Because his whole arc was trying to take out Satan using Gabriel as the means to that.
Yeah, the cat's paw.
In order to weasel his way out of being condemned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, Zobek is last. Like in all good Castlevania games, death is the second to last boss fight.
Yes.
Yep.
But also because when you see in a lot of fiction that somebody has to fight the personifications of the deadly sins, pride is always at the top. And I think that has to do with the fact that pride was seen as the worst sin because of the fact that pride goeth before a fall.
Oh, I always thought it's just because there's so many people in the world who are completely prideful. Everyone does it.
Well, that too, but remember that the reason they blame Lucifer for his fall, his prideful nature against God's command. So pride being the top sin is kind of tied into the fall of Lucifer and all that other stuff. So pride being left for Zobek and also being left for last is thematically relevant and good.
Besides, we've all read Paradise Lost at least once.
Yeah.
Among other things, yes.
So with that off the list, and obviously Zobek would be the last one covered. We'll get to that. We'll get to him in a bit.
We have Risa and we have Nurgle.
So with Risa, you have her as the head of a corporation. You have the transformation she goes through that almost makes her look like, I guess, would you say a griffin?
Yeah, close enough.
I mean, her demon form is very. It's a chimera of sorts.
You know, for a moment when you said very and pause for a moment, I was half expecting you to say something horny. I'm going to be honest.
I mean, that speaks more to you than me, doesn't it?
No, that speaks to the people I've known on the internet from streaming too long.
So yeah, more to you than me.
Well, but you've known me for a while, so
yeah.
She looks like if we're being honest here, this chimera where you have looks sort of draconic, but at the same time there's some feathered bird elements, and then just of course the weird demonic parts of it.
So it gets coddle.
Quetzalcoatl, probably. I would say that's probably greed. Yeah. She definitely was not a slothful person.
True, she was the CEO after all, so.
And she was constantly doing stuff, constantly performing experiments.
I would say for the staging, this is going to be one of the easier ones. You go from a laboratory or a research complex to an alchemy lab.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, that one's fairly easy.
Yeah. And obviously, I actually think that she should begin the fight in her humanoid form. And then instead of, Dracula thinking that she isn't one of the acolytes and giving her the antidote, it instead, allows her to assume her full-on true demonic form. She jabs it in her neck herself, and then we get that full-on demonic chimera. It's a chimera. Let's be honest. Now, really, her stage, everything seems pretty straightforward. Nurgle, I think, should get sloth, especially considering he liked to do things with cat's paws and never himself. He killed Victor using a statue instead of coming out and just killing Victor himself. But I also think that, there's a magical field around his weapons development corporation that weakens Dracula thing is kind of... It's bland.
Yeah, we don't need kryptonite.
We don't need kryptonite. I mean, you could say that due to the power of sloth, you can weaken enemies in that way instead, whatever. But it's directly in combat, etc. Ultimately, as the embodiment of sloth in this cardinal sin soup we're making, he isn't sloth in the way most people imagine it, which is just not doing anything. It's not doing anything himself. I think that this battle should take place not in a weapons manufacturing building, but maybe in an R&D department that's developing remote weapons. Whether those are drones or robots. Yes, this is an excuse for me to bring in mecha-based enemies. Fuck you. I will appeal to myself all I want, and you cannot stop me.
You know those annoying things in the stealth segments that had those that ended up looking like poor man's space marines?
Yeah.
Why not have those as golems?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could work really well.
Same design, it's just a flesh golem that you've put a bunch of armor and weapons on.
Yep, and Nurgle is controlling at least somewhat, obviously not directly, but at least directing remotely in some way. The whole first half is going to be in the modern portion against these cat's paws that Nurgle is just using to try and keep Dracula away, slow Dracula down, and if he can, capture him and bring him to Satan. But clearly, at this point, you've gone through five of his compatriots. You're and you've got lots of powers and strength at this point, so tearing through this first half, while dangerous, should still feel kind of like it's a battle within Dracula's favor at this point.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of a power trip before the final couple stages.
Yeah, a little bit of a power trip just to show, hey, you've progressed as Dracula. This entire first half of the fight with Nurgle, it shows that they're underestimating you because they don't realize how much you've gained.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're tearing shit apart. You know, if you're not careful, you're still going to take some damage, and if you're not super careful, you may even die because you're being negligent. I've seen people do that when they get into power stomp stages, and I think that negligence should lead to loss in that case. Sure, you're powerful, but that doesn't mean you can be negligent.
Mm-hmm.
Fun story. You just reminded me of something. This is completely off the topic, but it reminds me because at one point I was showing a friend. It was their first time ever playing a Sonic game. I let them play Sonic Generations. They got Supersonic on Green Hill Zone Act 1. They thought, oh yeah, I can do this. They immediately fell into a pit and died.
Like I said, just because you're now in curb stomp mode doesn't mean you get to be complacent.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, so that first half takes place in this R&D zone where all of these particular remote weapons that Nurgle is designing are now being tossed against Dracula. But as we go into the castle, since we know that at some point the castle was owned by Frankenstein before it was owned by the Bernards and then by Carmilla, we're in Frankenstein's lab directly.
I would be perfectly fine with that, and it kind of leans into that because the time that you do fight him, he tries using lightning on you. So, going with Frankenstein would be a natural choice.
Yeah.
Although
and so,
it does bring the inevitable question: is it pronounced Frankenstein or Frankenstein?
Yes.
Igor.
I had to get that one out of my system.
Of course. But Nurgle, I think, because this is a power trip and a power trip level for, I think, a power trip boss, and let's be honest, depending on how you play Castlevania games, some of the bosses really are power trip bosses.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we start at the Igavania / Metroidvania stages of games, there are some bosses that just, you go in and you're like, huh, I've been to these parts of the castle, got some cool shit. I hope this boss is fine. And then the boss is just a joke because, well, either you over-prepared or you might have accidentally sequence broke without realizing.
Or in the case of Doppelganger 1, stopwatch. He stands perfectly still that entire time. You just wail on him.
Yep. Or half of the bosses in Order of Ecclesia if you have the right glyphs. Man. But so I think that even the fight against Nurgle himself, while harder than the first half, is still not going to be a fair challenge. Dracula's going to be fucking on him and just tear his ass a new one. Again, don't be complacent or he'll kill you. But I think that this is a good way to show the player you've become pretty fucking powerful. Now you might actually measure up to Zobek and Satan.
Also, I think we all three already agree that the fight going up to Zobek, it has to be a clock tower.
You're not hearing any objections from me.
It has to be a clock tower. I'd imagine the platforming will be significantly less bullshit than some of the forms the clock tower has taken over the years.
I imagine it'll be a full moon as well, as usual.
But
I also think that the fight against Sobek should not transition from the real world to the castle and should be an unholy mixture of the two from the get-go.
Or what could be done is, the clock tower, instead of being an unholy mixture, it could just be something that the clock tower from the original castle never got destroyed. It's still there, and they've just built up and reinforced it over the years. Because the one thing that would always stay is, people making sure they could tell time.
I can see that too. But what I'm saying is that, like, we've had the transfer from the real world to the ephemeral of the castle. The clock tower is going to be the same in both of them if we do a transfer. But what I'm saying is that the unholy nature of what Zobek and Satan are doing means that because they kept the clock tower reinforced in the modern world, the aura of the castle there never went away. And so the unholy castle's spiritual / ephemeral side has always been there.
And another thing I think is, we talk about how full moon. What we could do is, instead of it just being a full moon, make it to where it starts off with it being a normal full moon, and as the night continues on, because have it all happen in one night. As the night continues on, you see a lunar eclipse slowly but surely start to happen, and that lunar eclipse happens for the final fight against Satan.
Just so we can have a lunar eclipse that opens a gate to a place, just like Arya and Donasaru.
Exactly, a nice little reference to those two.
I knew where you were going, but yeah, at the top of the clock tower, Zobek. Well, pride. I don't think he needs to hide anything. The clock tower itself is going to be pretty much a challenge to get through, just because you're going to have high level enemies and again the platforming. But Zobek himself, this is no joke at this point. Zobek is the typical death is fucking hard in most Castlevania games fight. He's going to have the zoning that all the little fucking teleporting sickles always fucking goddamn have. Ugh! Don't get me started. He's gonna have the goes across the room bullshit. He's gonna have everything that you would expect of a death fight and then some. Because this is Zobek. He's not just death now. He's also got pride empowering him. There's gonna be some problems.
Yeah, and honestly, I think one thing that would be a good idea, just thematically, is, as we know in Lords of Shadow, Lords of Shadow 2, there's the light magic, dark magic thing. Zobek is death. Make it to where dark magic does nothing to him.
I would be a little hesitant to cut off one major pillar of your kit like that.
No, I'm not saying don't let it do. Like maybe it can still do stun, but maybe it doesn't do hardly anything. Is what I'm getting at. So the player has to focus more on the skills they've learned throughout the game, like the stuff they've unlocked, use their tools. Light magic could still do something because, they gotta have a way to heal.
Yeah.
But make it to where this time it's purely down to their skill, because that's what death has always been in every Castlevania game, where it's just a test of your skill. Raw and simple.
What I would say is that shadow magic is only going to be applicable in certain parts of the fight, not cut it off completely.
That could work.
Especially since the one part of Lords of Shadow 1 and 2's kit that everybody conveniently forgets when they bring up the God of War straw man, that's what it is. Is the focus scroll part of it. The fact that you have to hit and not get hit in order to build that up so you can get unaligned orbs that you can convert into light or shadow magic.
Yep.
And because of that, dodging instead of tanking is much more advisable. And I do think that there is a proper framework in two particular fights from Lords of Shadow 1 that can be used. One of them was the fight against Pan when he took on the form of the Silver Warrior. The other is the fight against Satan. Since in significant sections of that fight, both Pan and Satan are shifting forms, and even having whole areas that are doing the Ikaruga thing of, as long as you're having that particular side active, you're not going to get damaged. Oh, and by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't point this out. If people actually want Ikaruga in a Vania form, we already have that. It's called Outland.
But we don't get into that.
Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Well, I'm not telling you that you're lying. I'm just saying that that's rails at that point.
Mhm. But there was a small part of me that had considered having Zobek using something of a callback, whether it be his scythe taking some notes from the original combat cross, or even as part of the fight, him digging up the god mask from the original Lords of Shadow. Uh, since not to even though he had that in the fight at the end of the original Lords of Shadow, the intent here is to utilize it so that you have to vary up your strategies. Otherwise, he's going to automatically counter you at some points.
Mm-hmm.
You know, since the whole point of the mask is being able to see through God's eyes. And one could easily...
Even though the mask is a fool's errand.
The mask was a fool's errand for what Gabriel wanted out of it. It's actually the same curse that you see that Pegasus had when it came to the Millennium Eye.
Yep.
Gabriel could see his wife, but that's all that he could do.
Yeah.
Yep.
He should have read the fine print.
Mm-hmm.
Devil's in the details now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, devil was in his face right there, but yeah, I guess in the details too.
But
what I'm glad that we're doing here, by the way, that right after Zobek, you go into the eclipse to fight Satan. I'm glad we're skipping Inner Dracula. That was kind of dumb.
Not only was it kind of dumb, in this particular instance, there isn't really a point.
Yeah, there's no need for it in this case. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because his slow mastery of things and conquering the deadly sins would also, I think, be giving him control of the castle regardless. And so he wouldn't need to also fight an inner dark version of himself.
No, and if any final test is needed, you can easily integrate both Alucard and Victor as those final tests.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, like we said, the eclipse occurs when we go and fight Satan himself.
Mm-hmm.
Satan is
He's angry.
I mean, everything has fallen around him because, well, Dracula decided that Satan was going to get it for tricking him about the God Mask in the first game.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, you convinced me that I could revive my wife through Zobek, and that didn't happen. I'm a little angry at you right now, Satan. Satan's like, I don't give a fuck. You've ruined my plans for thousands of years. What the hell, man? This is all set up. Yeah, well, that's what you get when you get in the way of love.
Yeah.
The power of love.
But now, throughout all of this, there is the issue of how one would integrate Alucard, and I would actually say a way to do it is having some segments take place in more of a daytime setup.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but I think that since we haven't had Victor really show up in Dracula's path, I think the primary antagonist for Alucard's events should be Victor trying to get in his way. I personally think that Victor as a Belmont would see both Dracula and Alucard as shames to the Belmont family.
Well, counter argument. At this point, they would know that Alucard is on the Belmont side, due to the fact of hundreds of years of Alucard working against Dracula.
Yes, but let's say that Victor, the reason he calls himself the last of the Belmonts is because he thinks of himself as the only one who remembers that their mission is to kill all vampires. So he sees the rest of the Belmont clan as kind of not exactly traitors, but those who have forgotten their mission because they've accepted Alucard's help. Because, let's be perfectly fair, Trevor, given Dracula's blood, is still technically part vampire. That's why he's able to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
He's not full vampire, but let's say Victor is a little bit more of a zealot compared to the rest of the Belmont clan when it comes to vampiric extermination.
Mm-hmm.
And let's also say that he stole the vampire killer from whoever actually was supposed to wield it.
Though it almost makes it sound like you want Trevor to be a bit of a Belmont zealot.
Victor.
Not Victor.
I want Victor to be maybe the stories of Gabriel prior to becoming Dracula inspired him. And then hearing as he got older, because, the children aren't going to be told the full story of Gabriel becoming Dracula. They're just going to say, oh yeah, Gabriel fell in the war against Dracula. But as they get older, the clan is going to tell them, yeah, what actually happened is Gabriel became Dracula. And that's going to shatter his worldview. A bit of hero worship that then becomes don't meet your heroes, even though he never meets his hero. He still gets the reality of his hero, that shattered illusion. And that's why he's taken the perceived role of the Belmont clan as being the vampire exterminators to an extreme. And he sees that their cooperation with Alucard, who, yes, is technically, ancestor Trevor, but is also a part vampire and should also be killed because vampire bad, is what's making him get in the way of Alucard as Alucard does his parts of the game. But I also think that this should be a way that, through the conflict, Victor can be pulled out of zealotry depending on choices you make as Alucard. I want there to be a potential redemption arc depending on how you choose to play as Alucard.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically for Victor.
Yeah. And
besides, we've had the fights with the brainwashed Belmonts before. Hello, Richter. Hello, Julius.
Mm-hmm. I do think that Alucard's fighting style should be slightly different.
I think it should be vastly different.
Yeah.
I like because he's using the Crusadegrim, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, well, Dracula is being Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've always seen Alucard's fighting style compared to the Belmonts as being much more... What's the word, Monk? I'd almost say more graceful.
Flowing?
Yeah, graceful and flowing makes sense there. I mean, that probably partially has to do with the fact that he's lived hundreds of years and been able to perfect his fighting style, and the other part being the preternatural, senses and faculties he has as being half vampire. So, there's all that.
Mm-hmm.
The Belmonts are humans who push themselves to the limit to be accepted by Vampire Killer in order to go kill Dracula. And that doesn't always manifest as the most graceful fighting. They're there to put them down and just fight.
Okay, though I do have to hold back. I do have to say hold up a little bit, because you're starting to go into original Castlevania timeline story beats, whereas those aren't in Lords of Shadow.
Yes, it's a comparison more than an actual foundation, is what I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, I know.
And the big thing here is that Alucard should be... Like, we've got the whole don't get hit for the focus scroll.
Mm-hmm.
I think that instead, maybe some parry-based gameplay, since we have a really good sword.
I would say he should... In that regard, here's what I'm thinking. And to some, this is going to sound a little bit familiar, but I would not have it that he channels the that he does not channel light and shadow magic in the in the same way. Instead, instead he's building up using parries and doing finishers that are light or shadow aligned.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I could see that. I think the only problem I have with it is the light and shadow magic thing really feels unique to Gabriel. Like that was Gabriel's thing. Like the combat cross that could be, a whip and other things. That was something every part of the Brotherhood of Light had. And technically they were also supposed to know the light and shadow magic, but it never felt like any of them used it as well as Gabe did. And that just became more pronounced as he became Dracula and more powerful. I'm wondering if maybe we should give Alucard a different magic as a finisher altogether, maybe.
That's actually what I was thinking. I wasn't going to be using light and shadow as the typical gauges.
Okay.
But having two finishers for his combos.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially building up to an execution, not too far removed from Sekiro.
I knew that's what you were going when I mentioned parry play. So Monk, let me bet one further here. Let me raise you. Instead of the finishers being light or shadow, why not a mixture? Alucard's whole theme, whether it's in the old timeline or the new timeline, is being caught between worlds, being a mixture. Instead, let's make it. What name do you want to give this? Duskfall. Let's call it the Duskfall executions. A combination of light and shadow that brings an end to all. What say ye?
I'm perfectly fine with going with that.
Mm-hmm.
Writer brain is a terrible curse. Sometimes you just think up cool shit and have to say it.
Yeah.
But I can perfectly accept that parries will allow you to get some super executions that are going to make fights against maybe bigger enemies and whatever easier, or whatever boss you might be fighting, or Trevor, or not Trevor, Victor, excuse me. And I think that we already agreed that we're going to kind of keep Alucard's purpose in the side missions as he's trying to help set up things so that Dracula can get what he needs, right? Because that was his role in the DLC anyway.
Yeah.
I still think that the primary stumbling block along the way should be Victor getting in Alucard's way, just because there's going to be that comparison between the man trapped between worlds and the man who thinks that there should only be one world. And that sort of juxtaposition tickles my funny bone.
Yeah. Now, I know there's the question of whether or not we would have Victor playable. Honestly, that's something that would be better served as like a New Game Plus kind of thing.
I can see that as a New Game Plus reward for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like maybe, or better yet, instead of New Game Plus, make it sort of a thing that's sort of like how Resident Evil 4 has the separate ways for Ada Wong. That way you can see, Victor going through his stuff, sort of after you beat the main game. That way it doesn't clash. You play the separate micro campaign, and then you get a little bit more clarity on what happened.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
And we could even start with the tutorial being his whole stealing vampire killer from the Belmont clan and getting out of there.
Well, would it be from the Belmont clan, or would it be for the Brotherhood at this point?
Does the Brotherhood have the vampire killer instead of the Belmont clan at that point?
The vampire killer isn't what was used. It was the combat cross.
Yeah, it was the combat cross. Technically, the vampire killer was still held by Zobek.
That's true.
So yeah, it'd be the combat cross.
Okay,
And
I can see that.
combat crosses were pretty much standard issue with the Brotherhood, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in other words, what Victor ends up taking is just a combat cross.
Because the Brotherhood of Light doesn't want him, since he's too zealous in the idea of even destroying someone like Alucard.
Mm-hmm. Or if you want to add some nice poetry to it, could be that the one he gets is from a museum, which used to be Trevor's combat cross.
That would be nice. I think we should do that. That good.
Yeah.
That good. We like that.
That would work. And as far as the final boss fight, I think when it comes to that, there's not too much I would change. That's obviously meant to be the final test. I do think that both Dracula / Gabriel and Alucard should both be involved in it. And as far as the finishing blow, I'm honestly thinking it would be apropos to use the stake on the combat cross.
Mm-hmm.
You know, bring everything full circle.
Oh, definitely.
I can see that. And since we already have that Victor took Trevor's combat cross, and that Victor and Alucard are going to be against each other on Alucard's side of things, part of Alucard's involvement is, no matter what happens at the end of Alucard's story, whether you manage to redeem Victor or whether you had to kill him, Victor, you get the cross from him, whether from his dead body or he hands it over. And that's what part of what Alucard takes to the final battle against Satan. And the both of them get to get in on the staking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at this point, part of me wonders, would it behoove the story to have that redeem or not redeem thing, or would it just be better that, you know, over time he comes to see what's really going on, and even if he still holds a grudge, he helps out anyway. That way, it's a 3 Belmont family battle against the Lord of Darkness.
Pretty much.
We could do it that way. I like having a little bit of ambiguity in some parts of gameplay to give people rewards for really trying hard to do some things in a more difficult fashion. And I figured that redeeming Victor was going to be the more difficult path in Alucard's part of the story.
Oh, I get that. I'm just thinking if there was going to be something like that, it'd be better suited for a pure Metroidvania instead of something that's more stage by stage based.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I can certainly see that better suits the staging process we've created. So
yeah, because in a full Metroidvania, you can go back and get the stuff that you missed. And a stage by stage, just think of, no, you mess up once,
I do think that the ending. I would keep most of what happened in that. You know, even though we haven't used the Mirror of Fate at all in this because we don't really need to. The idea that after going through all of that, instead of trying to seek his final death, he would rather sleep for a while, because I would pull a Riku Sanjo and go with the idea that another person may try this same stunt in the future of trying to bring him into the physical world. So he would sleep for a while and essentially imply that Alucard would create a new Brotherhood of Light.
Mm-hmm.
Alucard and Victor would work together to reestablish the Brotherhood of Light, and probably put the Belmont clan at the head of it too.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that.
Yeah.
And obviously any potential followers, that's not meant to be followed up on. That's why I said I'd be pulling a Riku Sanjo.
Mm-hmm.
following up on that is not the point.
Yeah, it's just supposed to be a nice little bookend with all right, if this happens, they'll be ready, but it probably won't happen.
It's just there as a like you said, a bookend, and like I like to call it a hook.
Yeah.
There's always a theme hook you can hang something off of later if you really need to.
Mm-hmm.
But that pretty much covers how this kind of thing could go down. And the key with doing this is that instead of adding a bunch of extra stuff, as much of it is kept as tight as possible thematically. And that's ultimately the key here. Keep things as tight as possible and don't have any excess fat.
Keep it simple, stupid. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in that same vein, you emphasize the strengths that were present within Lords of Shadow, while not falling into certain narratives. And I'm pretty sure some would argue that this would still be too linear, but that linearity is used as a way to better emphasize the story that's meant to be told.
Mm-hmm.
Because is it possible that you could do this kind of story in the typical Metroidvania-style castle? Yes, but it would become very sprawling, and the idea of interconnecting all those different stages to try and make one giant castle would result in a lot of things not meshing, or at worst, you just turn the castle part of what we've done into a separate castle, a la Symphony of the Night or Harmony of Dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, I like both of those games, but that is repeating what's been done before. And
yeah,
I've made it clear I resent the idea that one has to do the Metroidvania approach just by default.
Yeah, I mean, I agree because I love Metroidvanias. It's one of my favorite genres of games, but it doesn't have to be one. It can just be there to tell a story, and to tell a story, it's easier to go with a more linear fashion.
And this,
I mean,
this
it depends on the types of stories you want to tell too. The sprawling fashion of a Metroidvania really suits telling multiple interlocking stories, as we saw with Bloodstained.
And this isn't an interlocking story. This is the story of redemption for the Belmont family.
Yes, it's a singular story, and thus a tighter focus is a better course of action. Absolutely.
Yep.
I agree.
Much in the same way that the story of the first Lords of Shadow was solely focused on Gabriel Belmont.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. Whereas you look at, say, since Bloodstains was brought up, let's use that. You have multiple stories that are taking place all at once.
Yeah, and that's why I pointed out that as a Metroidvania, it made sense for it to be one. You had multiple stories happening and interlocking with each other, and Bloodstained perfectly suited that.
Yeah.
And so, but of course, Bloodstained is also Iga, and he kind of, I think
he wrote that book.
He fucking knows what he's doing. I kickstarted that shit. Come on now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting here is that when it came to like combat mechanics and even to a certain amount of exploration, that kind of thing we didn't really have to touch all that much. We just gave better context to the castle part of things.
Yeah, because the mechanics are perfectly solid, honestly.
Yeah, besides the stealth sections, which we did revise in certain ways.
Yeah.
Yes, the combat mechanics, the mechanics of Lords of Shadow and of the Lords of Shadow series are tight. They're focused. They feel really good, and that's good gameplay. As Asmongold always says, it doesn't matter if the game looks like it's from 2002. If the gameplay is good, people will play it.
I will say, speaking of the gameplay, though, there is one thing I would change.
Go for it.
I'd make it to where the quick time events are always turned off.
Yeah.
QTEs. What are those? Are we
exactly?
Are we? What are we playing? Are we playing Shenmue? What?
like
QTEs can be fun if they're not overused, depending on the game. I mean, because the comparison has been made, and we've already talked about how it's a straw man, I can bring up God of War 3, the fight against Poseidon, when you get the L3R3 prompt to poke out his eyes with your thumbs from Poseidon's point of view. That's a fucking cool-ass QTE, and I would not remove it from the game for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But, overuse of QTEs can be an issue, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, that is going to do it for this special edition of GeekWatch. Obviously, we will be back on the normal affairs this Sunday with something a bit more tabletop related, sort of. And I will be back on the usual interview train tomorrow. And of course, Thursday and Friday will be the return of Valley of the Judge. So your regularly scheduled bullshittery. So with that said, a sincere thanks, as always, goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. Thank you all for being able to make it all the way to the temple again.
Thank you for actually finally meeting you in person, because, you've always been fun to interact with in your chat, and, I just think we'll be the best of friends.
Mm-hmm. And thanks again for having me on. I appreciate when I get the chance to be here. Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping the next time won't be 4 months removed.
Yeah, life gets busy, don't it?
Oh, this. I am no stranger to this. This isn't even the worst case. That honor still goes to when I had John Swayze on, and we spent months trying to get things together, but something would always happen.
Oh.
Well, and then there's, of course, the fact that this motherfucker never stops working unless we force him.
Are you talking about Mildred or me?
Yes.
Okay.
We have to force either of you to take a fucking vacation.
But of course, there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty and join the watch.
The watch.
You fucked it up.